Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 58 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. Today, Scott and I are talking about building a better budget, which is that time of year, right, Scott?
It absolutely is. Some of you may have already started working on your budgets, but for those of you that haven't, I know that time is coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope you've already started working on it, unless maybe maybe your budget started back in June. Who knows? Different fiscal years for different churches, but it is common that in the fall, you would be starting a new budget, or maybe if you're lined up with the calendar year, January you will, and in which case you are super in luck today because this gives you a little bit more time to work through, hopefully, some of the best practices that we'll talk about today.
That's right. Yeah, I think what the common sort of broken system for church budgets is copy and paste. Okay,
Absolutely.
Just to take whatever you did last year and then look at the numbers on what you brought in. And so maybe you say, well, we did 2020 was a rough year. We'll talk more about that later, but 2020 was a rough year. So let's just cut by X percent, apply those cuts evenly across all ministry areas, and that's the kind of change. Unless there's something really drastic that happens and you got to lose a staff position or whatever to drastically cut. But there's not a lot of intentionality behind building, increasing, or reducing the budget. It's just sort of, here's how much money we have, and then let's just kind of wing it, copy and paste as best we can. And here's what I want you to remember today. Copy and paste makes waste. That is the absolute truth. So we are firm believers in the concept of zero-based budgeting. And if that is a new term to you, you're going to learn a lot about that today and how to do that in your church. But the philosophy behind it is you should only fund what moves you forward. And man, that makes such a difference, AJ, when a church decides we're only going to fund what moves us forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Money is a tool. It's not, I know you hear people like, oh, it's just kind of like an evil necessity that we have to deal with. No, money fuels ministry. And if you use it as a tool, then it can be your friend to help you achieve your goals in ministry.
That's right. Yeah. Money is not immoral or moral. It's amoral. It's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so how you use that tool and how you use that thing can make you more effective or less effective in ministry. So we have 5 steps today that we're going to walk you through. This is kind of a lot. We're going to try to pack it in. So if you don't normally listen to us while you're driving, this might be a good one to sit down in your office and pull out a notepad because it's very practical.
Let's kick this off real quick, though, just with a note about COVID and just kind of an overall philosophy in which you might want to consider 2021. We know this is a weird year. 2020 is weird. It's super weird. But just in general, we're kind of saying today, kind of just treat it like we would suggest you treat almost any other year. And by saying that, we mean, let's just budget 2021 for about 5% less than 2020. Wherever you've ended up this year, you don't have to go like crazy for next year. Like the world is ending and let's try to do ministry on nothing. Just look at how it's landed up for you. A lot of churches have done just fine this year, a little bit off. Some have done a little bit better. Some have not done very well.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about this further down into our steps, but it's a good note on the front end to just say it's always good advice to budget below your means. That's good advice, whether that was 2017, whether that's going into 2021, when it's 2031. Always budget below your means and define your means as about 5% less than what you did or what you're projected to do in the current year. You'll never be sad that you did that because you will almost always have extra. Or if you don't meet your budget, if you don't meet what you did this past year, you will likely at least do 95% of what you did last year. And that's a good thing. So healthy churches budget below their means. We'll talk more about this as we get further into the podcast. But yes, That would be our advice, because that would be our advice every year. That's always a good tact. So let's hop straight into step one, AJ.
Let's go. Uh, Mission and vision. All right. So right away, now here we are. We're talking budget, and all of a sudden, these Malfers Group guys are talking mission and vision. We can't help it. We love it, and it's important. Know it, live it. Mission and vision is what drives your church, and it's what needs to drive your budget. Don't let this be the other way around. And like Scott was saying this in the introduction, if you're used to a copy and paste budget, then we're about to knock your legs out from under you, because what you want to accomplish in ministry is what should drive your budget, not
Yeah.
just what you happen to have spent last year, especially if this would become a new concept for you and you've been doing the copy and paste thing. If you first know what your mission is, making mature disciples of Jesus, and what your vision is, the big impact you're going to make in your community and around the world, and how you've organized your church to do ministry, then you should be really gaining a really clear picture of what you're going to do next year to achieve those goals. And that's where you'll begin to put dollar amounts to things.
Yeah. So when we work with a church, um, there's two things that we always do with them. One is we define what we call vision indicators. So these are 1 year, like a 1 year dashboard to show the progress you intend to make or hope to make over the next year. So, and those are aligned with your discipleship pathway. So it's going to show you, how are we making disciples over the next year, or what are the measures that we did that. So when you're looking at your budget, then everybody's going to have a finger in that pot and a finger in that responsibility of making that happen. Okay. So if you aren't budgeting around making those measures a reality, then those measures are just ideas on a page, and they're really useless. Another thing that we do, every church does, that we work with, is we ask the question, what are we going to do this year? And so we define projects for each one of your discipleship pathway steps. And you are going to set a specific project for each step in the process, essentially discovering how are you going to improve above and beyond the normal course of operations. What are you going to do to improve in each of these areas?
Mm-hmm.
This is what drives you. This is the fuel, AJ, for that vision.
Yep.
You know, if you always just do the bare minimum and what needs to get done year to year, you're going to stay in the same place. But if you go, what's the 1% better we can do this year in each step? So again, every ministry, whether it be children's ministry, student ministry, worship ministry, small groups ministry, doesn't matter. Everyone's going to have a stake of ownership in one or more of those projects. And so you got to have that information before you start building the budget and going, okay, here's where we're going. Here are our projects. Here's what we have to get done. So
That's right.
Without that, we're not going to be able to do it very well.
All right, so this is a great segue into step 2 now, and that is to rebuild the budget starting from zero. And so this is really the meat of what we're talking about today. This is zero-based budgeting at its most basic level. The ministries in your church will start off with zero. You're not copying, pasting from last year.
Yeah.
You're building what your budget needs to be to accomplish your ministry goals for your ministry areas. Now,
Yep.
we've got, and we'll get back into this here in a second, there are some things that are going to just copy over. I mean, your mortgage is unlikely to change. Most of your payroll is probably changing. There's some caveats to that. There's a lot of things, insurance and utilities. We'll touch more on that here in a moment as well. Some things will carry over. Ministry things likely will not, other than maybe some repetitive costs for curriculum and different things like that you know you're going to have.
Yeah. So I would kind of, here's my advice. If you're a small church, I would not worry about trying to zero base your operational and personnel expenses.
Yeah.
Because you have very few staff. Because there's few staff, there's probably very low turnover in your staffing. And your operational expenses are probably pretty bare minimum anyway. If you're a larger church, as counterintuitive as it might seem, because there's more complexity there, I think it's worth it to zero base those operational expenses, because when you have, say, a $500,000 or $700,000 personnel budget, at that size, there's a good chance that you've got a lot of turnover in there. So it makes sense to look, especially if right now you've got some open positions, don't just copy and paste what those positions were. Now's a great time in your budget season to go, what's the staff complexion that we really want to have?
Hmm.
Look at your vision, look at where you're going and go, you know what, maybe we shouldn't just replace that admin position with the exact same thing, right? Maybe we should move those dollars towards something else. So I think the larger your church is, the more things you should zero base budget. If you're a smaller church, you're under 500 people or you're under 200 people, I would say just work on your ministry budgets. Just zero base that. That's a big enough thing to try and tackle. And when we, again, like AJ said, that when we say zero base, it means you tell your youth pastor, your budget is $0. Tell me why it shouldn't be that.
That's a great
Tell
way
me
of
why
saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, justify what it is that you plan to do over the course of the next 12 months. And so, like AJ said, you would start with those costs that you know you're going to have. Well, we know that our curriculum from Orange costs us $400 a year. Okay, great. So now you've justified $400. Now tell me why you need anything else than that. Well, each week we have supplies that we need to do. Okay, so tell me about that's how you start doing. You start building it up. Well, and hopefully as you're rebuilding it, AJ, you're thinking through, does that move the needle for us? Do we really need to do that thing?
Right.
How is it going to help us? Where is that going to drive us forward? So I had an experience with this, AJ, back in my student ministry days. I was reworking my own budget and realizing that we were going on one too many retreats per year. And I worked full time doing middle school ministry, and there was one retreat that we did every year to what's called TCTC, it's Tennessee Christian Teen Convention. And I don't know if any of our listeners have ever been to TCTC, and I don't know how it is today, but back in my middle school ministry days, AJ, back in my day, when I was leading students there, TCTC was not a middle school friendly event. It wasn't. They let middle schoolers go, but everything was really geared towards high school students. And they had some middle school options, but it still just wasn't. And I really felt like it wasn't a good investment. I thought, just going to Gatlinburg for 3 days with these kids, just so that they can go to Gatlinburg, but they're not really getting anything spiritually from it because it's not developmentally appropriate for them, is a waste of my money as a ministry, is a waste of the parents' money, and just not a good investment of our time. And so when I took a really hard look at that budget, I realized this is not something that we should be doing. I got some pushback from it initially, but only for like 10 seconds, because then parents understood we were building our budget and we were building our schedule and program, AJ, around what was best for middle school kids to help them know and follow Jesus. And we always get buy-in on that when you start to see the fruit of it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also another point in your budget that is a great time to be looking at some repetitive costs, but ones that might be able to be lowered, such as insurance, utilities. If a lot of states have deregulated electricity service. I live in Texas and we have deregulation here, so I can shop for electric service. A lot of states allow that now, and because it's a competitive market, there's better rates to be found. I'm surprised. We've been deregulated for like 25 years, and I still meet people just on their personal for their home electricity that have no clue about that. They're still paying like the big, major company that used to be the only one. They don't even know that there's an option for that. So consider that as well. Internet service.
We don't have those choices.
Cell phone service. You don't get that in Tennessee, Scott?
Oh no, you've got one choice for power.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's too bad.
I know, it's so sad. Here's the note. Okay. So if you're trying to figure out like, how does this even work? Here's what kind of a key principle here. There's no cap given to ministries.
Yeah. Good
So
point.
you don't tell them. So when they come in and you say, all right, AJ, Pastor AJ, your ministry has $0 for next year. We want you to build your budget. I don't then also say, but quit when you get to $10,000.
Right.
Because what do you think you're going to do, AJ? You're going to think, well, if that's what my cap is,
Yeah.
I'm going to keep building until I get to
Hit
$10,000.
it and then I'm done. Yeah. Might as well have copied and pasted.
Well, yeah, or you'd go, because if I give you no cap, two things could happen. One, you could way overshoot what I would want you to do, 10,000, right? But you might also undershoot. If I don't give you that $10,000 number on the front end, AJ, you don't know that. So
Hmm.
you could get to 6,500, have everything you need for the year and quit. But if I say stop when you get to 10,000, when you get to 6,500, you're not going to quit. You're going to keep going until you get to that 10,000 because you're realizing, well, that's the most I could possibly get.
Yeah.
And so then you're building waste in, like the federal government, just trying to spend money so that you can protect it. It's a totally human reaction. But if I say start at zero and put in what you need, and there's trust, AJ, that has to be built here,
Hmm.
because that might mean that in 2021 your budget is $6,500 and it'd be the right ask. And it could be in 2022 your ask is $8,500. But if you've gone about it the right way, I'm not going about it looking at what you've put in there, AJ, and going, well, that's $2,000 more than last year.
Yeah.
The trust is, if I'm not putting it into this year, I could put it into the next year and I could still get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's a reasonable level of maturity expected in this. If your youth budget was 1,300 and they come back with 23,000 because, they want to have free pizza every single day, come on. Let's be realistic. And again, let's also be driven by our mission and vision.
I was gonna say the natural response to that would be like, "Tell me how that's gonna make a mature disciples." Like,
Yeah.
honestly, yeah,
So next, we want to talk about itemizing this budget. Don't let this be overlooked. You cannot give people a non-capped in theory budget and expect them just to throw some nice big round numbers at you. We've got to, and again, this is the whole purpose of zero-based budgeting is we're
right.
thinking through what am I going to do in ministry to accomplish my mission and vision and my goals for next year, and what does it cost to do that? So those need to be line by line. If you've got
Yeah,
events that you're doing or weekly things that you're doing or new ideas that you need some money for, we've got to have all this down.
yeah. You might have assumed that in step two, and it would have been a good assumption to make. But the reality is that I've seen a lot of church budgets, and I think that maybe it's some of the back of the napkin math going on by ministry people and going, okay, I think I need $300 for that. I need $1,000 for that. I need $500 for that. And then when they turn in their budget, they're just turning in the number. Well, why we call this out as a separate step is you want to be sure that when those budgets get submitted, that they are itemized, that you go, okay, so you know exactly how they built it, that it wasn't just back of the napkin math, that there really was some intentionality there. So this step three is just a check on step two.
Yeah.
It should have happened in step two, but step three makes it really clear. You can't just turn in a number. You need to show how you go. You show me your work, basically, right?
Right.
Like in school, show me your work.
Because it's necessary for step four. We're going to
That's right.
collaborate now on finalizing the budget. And so when you're now, and this is going to be set up different in your church. We're talking about this being a collaborative process. So of course, your ministry leaders are going to build out their individual budgets on their own, or maybe with a small group of leadership within their ministry. But we're coming back together now in a larger group to talk through everybody's budget. I mean, once you get all the numbers in and you're like, okay, gang, we're 50% higher than we were last year. That's okay. And if this is your first time doing this, that's especially okay because people don't really know what they can do with like this theoretical uncapped budget.
Freedom. Yeah.
But now we've got to talk through this and we're going to take this ministry by ministry and begin to make our case. And this is where the collaboration within your team becomes super helpful because you can listen to the ideas now of your leaders and maybe this is going to be something new that nobody has thought of yet. And you can go, wow, this really is a great idea. And yeah, we can see where you would need that extra $600 to do that. We definitely want to make sure that that happens for you.
Yeah.
But Scott, everybody doesn't always get what they want, right?
Yeah. So I essentially like to think of this as sort of within step four, it's sort of a 3-part process. Okay. So the first one is to come together and everybody, all your ministry leaders get to sort of report how they built their budget so that everybody on the team gets an understanding of here's why I built this the way that you did. And you don't make any changes at this point. You just go, okay, great. You take it because this is your ideal budget. You go, you go, okay, everyone has built this. Maybe there would be some pushback and go, now tell me about this. And then maybe someone might say, okay, yeah, I think I may have overestimated on this. But as a general rule, you're not asking for significant changes at this point. From there, it goes to whatever oversight group you have, whether that be a finance team, budget team, elders, deacons, whoever it is that provides oversight. And this alone, AJ, might be a shift for some churches.
Hmm.
I'm aware of several, especially smaller churches, where it's the finance team who makes the budget. It's the deacon team or the elders who make the budget in the first place. We're really encouraging you to let those who run the ministries build the budget.
Yeah.
Let those folks have voice in it, and let those other groups be take on that biblical role of
Right.
oversee the budget. And so it is them who have to make the hard call and say, okay, is this the budget we're going to move forward as is in faith, or do we need to say no? We're going to look at what we're projected to bring in 2020, reduce that by 5%, and set that as the cap. We you might apply a budget blueprint, which for us we would say, roughly no more than 50% or so for personnel, no more than 20% for operations, and facility and that sort of thing. At least 20% towards ministry budgets, and at least 10% towards outreach and missions. That would be like a rough blueprint. So you might look at it and go, wow, our proportions are way off, or whatever. We're not investing enough in this or that or the other thing, or too much in this or that or the other thing. So that oversight does their job in terms of oversight. And then they're going to send recommendations back down to the ministry leaders, AJ, and
Hmm.
say, we need to, okay, we're overinflated in this budget by, let's say, 3%. So AJ, when we comes back to those ministry leaders, what should they not do? If they're told, okay, we got to cut 3%, what would be the worst decision here?
The word is that, well, first of all, and you kind of said this before we started, Scott, the budgeting process is not intended to be distributed fairly. It's intended to be distributed productively. And
Yeah.
so telling everybody just take 3% off the top would be counterintuitive to producing the end results that you want to achieve. So
Yeah.
this is where we've got to come back together and recollaborate now on, we've got some cuts to make, everybody. Let's talk through again where we should make these cuts. It could be that we need to now increase, well, maybe we do need to take 3% away from a couple of areas so that we can give 6% to something else.
Yeah. I actually think that it's helpful here. So if they say, hey, we need to cut 3%, it's much easier in my mind, because of how the human brain naturally works, to then translate that into a dollar figure. So if we say 3%, let's say for your budget, that's $15,000. Okay. So then you say, all right, we got to find $15,000 of savings. So for the whole budget. Then start just finding spots. And like AJ said, it shouldn't be applied fairly. The goal is to make and mature more disciples in your church. There are likely some ministries that couldn't take a 3% cut and still do what they need to do,
Mhm.
but others that could take more than 3% cut and be effective. And so this is where that trust and that collaboration really comes in, because the goal is the mission, AJ. The goal is not to protect your budget.
Yeah.
Remember, you started at zero anyway, and next year you're going to start at zero again. So you might be the person that has to cut some out this year in order to make the thing run, but next year you might be the person that doesn't get anything cut. I mean, I know that I feel like I can see the pastors listening to this right now going, my team would never go for this. They will. They will if you cast the vision for it.
That's what I was about to say. Be the leader of the team then. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've got to get out of this protective silo mentality when it comes. I mean,
Yes.
we are one church with one mission, serving one Lord with one gospel, right? And we cannot be building budgets around, okay, well, everybody just find 3%. That is the easy thing to do, but it is not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Then the end result may be that, AJ, maybe everybody takes, $400 out of their budget, but that shouldn't be your starting point in
Right.
terms of figuring it out.
Don't
Yeah.
skip that conversation. It's important. One of the benefits that you're going to see out of this, and we didn't build this in as kind of a point to necessarily make, but unity will grow across your ministry staff and likely across your church as a result of this process. I mean, how many churches do we work with, Scott, in which really youth ministry doesn't really have a clue what children's ministry is doing or what outreach is doing? And everybody is siloed, no matter how much you think everybody's under one banner. But by going through this process, everybody is going to be aware what everybody else is doing towards your mission and vision. They're going to gain clarity in what you're doing as a whole, and break out of that siloed ministry mindset, and even grow hopefully in unity, supporting one another in those
Mhm.
efforts. So I think this is a
Yeah.
huge piece that is overlooked to really increase your staff performance, your overall ministry performance.
I've sat in some very political budget meetings in my day in churches. I can think of some very specific instances where there was maybe a budget overage over the last year, and
Mm.
so there was some capital funds there, and
Everybody's fighting for their piece.
there was no fighting to be done because you knew exactly who it was going to go to.
There you go.
It was essentially by uh, you know just who had been there the longest, or who could cause the biggest stink
Mm.
if things didn't go their way. And so we ended up spending, I can remember one specific instance where we spent $15,000 on we had like a $25,000 budget overage one year, and 15,000 of it went to going to making this sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but they were like stage risers type things that would only be used on Christmas,
Oh, wow.
when the stage needed to be different. And I was like, that's what we're doing. That's what we're gonna go. Like, it's gonna get used once a year, maybe, if you happen to configure the stage that way for
Yeah.
Christmas. And I remember, you know, as a young guy in ministry, especially, you're just like, it makes you so jaded, right?
Mm.
You go in with so much optimism, and then you're like, so this is how the sausage gets made, huh? Just because I know that he could cause a big stink for you, the senior pastor. This is how we're gonna do this. And I know that those of you listening, you've sat through those, and maybe you've been guilty of making those same decisions. You're like, we're gonna give the money to this guy because he could really make things uncomfortable for me. That is not a way to lead.
Wow.
It's not. It's
Red
not.
flag dysfunction.
It's super dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, our final
we
step
go one more
now,
step.
our final step is to finalize and monitor the budget. So after
Mhm.
the final changes have been made, you can put the OK stamp on it. But then, as we say when we work with churches building out discipleship pathways and implementation teams, now the work begins. Now we're going to live this out. And so this becomes just another of your tools, as we said in the beginning, as a part of your ministry framework to accomplish your goals in ministry towards your mission and vision. So work what you've put out. That itemization is going to come in handy again because it's a clear reminder and a statement of what you're going to spend the money on and why. And again, as we said, if previously a finance committee or even an elder board, deacon board, church council separated to a great extent from the actual work of the ministry happening, Monday through Sunday. Now if you're bringing this back more at the ministry leadership development level, then the job then becomes of those other committees or boards to monitor it, be the overseers of it, ask questions and give support, give encouragement to those ministry leaders who are now spending it, dollar by dollar each day.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty tired of pastors when it comes to technology going, no, I'm just not a technology guy. They do the same thing when it comes to money.
Oh
I'm not
yeah.
really. I'm guilty of this, AJ. You just organizationally, someone has a question within our group about money, and I'm like, I don't know. Talk to AJ. I'm not the money guy. Like, I'm guilty of this same thing, right? But if you are the senior pastor of your church, you should be fluent in your budget.
Hmm.
And when you go to those overseeing meetings with your elder team or your deacon team or your finance team or whatever group that is, you should never be surprised.
Yeah.
And you should be able to answer every question. No matter what size your church is, you should
Hmm.
be getting some sort of a report that is written in a way that you understand it every week. You know what money's coming in, you know what money's going out, you know what the cash flow situation is, you know what kind of cash on hand you have. So that way you can communicate well with staff. So as things come up, I mean, I understand the rhythms of, say, student ministry, for example. You got that huge chunk of cash that's going out in, say, January, February for camp, that you're not going to get a dime of that back in registrations until, May or early June, depending whatever how your timing works, April, May, June. And so you're going to have this be running this gap in cash for months. You got to know, as the pastor, can we float that expense for 3 or 4 months? Can we
Hmm.
and be able to communicate that well to your team when they're going, hold on a minute, we're seeing this huge deficit, and go, okay, no, that's the registration chunk that we had to send. Like, you need to be able to communicate these things well, fluently, and then be like, oh gosh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And then you're typing an email to the youth pastor, what is this? Why are you down? Like, you need to know what's going on.
Right.
Um, and I think maybe this is maybe a side benefit, AJ, of COVID. I think probably a lot of pastors are much more fluent in their budgets this year than they've ever have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it shouldn't take a crisis to make that
Right.
happen.
This is healthy leadership, healthy organizational leadership. This is part of your job. And yeah, so we've both met these pastors that it's almost like a badge of honor. I don't have access to anything, money. I
Yeah.
don't know. And I get the heart behind it. It's like this over stewardshipy kind of thing. High integrity is what they think it is,
Yeah.
but you know what? You can maintain great stewardship and integrity by, you don't have to be a check signer on the account, even if that's, if they feel like that's would be a thing, would be looked at weird. You don't have to know, how much every person gives in the church, but you should be well versed in your budget and where your monthly and weekly spending is. There's no reason for you not to be, and there's nothing wrong with you knowing that.
That's right. Ignorance is not a sign of integrity. Uh, the the lack of full autonomous control, that is integrity.
Yeah.
And you need to differentiate between the two. Okay, you not knowing where money's coming from or where it's going to, um, doesn't make you have higher integrity. It just makes you ignorant.
Yep.
Um, y- you may be unable to commit fraud more easily, I guess, but not necessarily, because sometimes you might make a boo boo and you didn't even know you did it because you don't have all the information on here. So
Yeah.
I would say, be smart, know a lot, but put in guardrails so that there's high transparency and high integrity.
Yep.
Really important. Gosh, we could probably spend a whole episode just on that topic.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we've done webinars on this, so that's because there's a lot to say.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a lot to say on it. All right, so let's just recap briefly, AJ. I'm going to walk through the 5 steps. Number 1, mission and vision. Make sure you have those pieces before you start the budgeting process. Your mission should be constant, but what are your goals for the next year? What are those measures connected to your mission for the next year? And also, what are those strategic projects that you're wanting to take on over the next year to improve so that you can make and mature more disciples? Give that to your team in advance. What is sidebar on this real fast? It is totally unfair for your team not to know those things before they budget. Because if you make your budget and then later you go, oh, and by the way, I want you to do these things on the budget that you created, that's not fair. You got to give them that information before they budget, or give them the opportunity to create. Like, if you go through a process with us, we'll often encourage churches to make a supplemental budget, create sort of a mid-range supplemental budget. Don't expect them to be able to do the things that they were asked to do on the budget that they made before they knew what they know now.
Mhm.
Create a sort of a budget part B so that they can do the things they need to do. Okay. Step 2, rebuild the budget starting from zero. Every ministry start from zero. If you're a small church, just do this with ministry budgets. If you're a larger church, do it with your operational and personnel budgets as well. Start at zero and rebuild. Some things are going to be easy to put back in because they're constant. Other things are going to take more thought and intentionality. Number 3, be sure that those budgets then are itemized so that as you're doing that reflection, you know exactly where every dollar is going. Step 4, collaborate. So that starts with sort of talking about your budget with your team, going into oversight, and then reconciling that budget based on the recommendations from your oversight team. And then fifth and finally, we've got our finalized budget, and now we're actively monitoring that. We are not believing that ignorance equals integrity. We are knowledgeable and fluent in our budget, and we are making good decisions and being responsive and proactive with our budget. Given the changing climate, we know if we've learned anything this year, it's that the situations can change. And so, if you are actively monitoring that budget, you're going to be more equipped and empowered to adapt to the changing reality that is always possible every year. Any closing thoughts, AJ?
Scott, how about we make our zero-based budgeting worksheet template available to our listeners?
Yep, that'll be there in the show notes. Go to malfersgroup.com/58, malfersgroup.com/58. There should be a little spot for you to download a zero-based budgeting worksheet that can help you get started in this process.
Yep, there you go. You have been listening to the Church Revitalization Podcast, and we're so glad you did. Join us again next week for another fresh topic. And be sure and subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app or system, whatever that may be. And give it a like, give it a comment, give it a share so that you can help others in ministry as well. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.